Welcome back, dear friends. Before we begin, let me know where in the world you are watching, and please don't forget to subscribe and like to support the channel. January 3rd, 1889. The morning breaks cold and clear over Turin, Italy. In the Piazza Carlo Alberto, a coachman struggles with his stubborn horse, his whip cracking through the frozen air. The animal refuses to move, perhaps sensing something in the atmosphere that humans cannot detect. The man's frustration grows, the whip falls harder, again and again. From across the square, a figure emerges, middle-aged, with an enormous walrus mustache and piercing eyes that have stared too long into abysses most people never dare to approach. Friedrich Nietzsche, 44 years old, one of the most brilliant philosophical minds in human history, watches this scene unfold. Something inside him breaks. He runs toward the horse. Observers would later struggle to describe what they witnessed. The philosopher throws his arms around the animal's neck, pressing his face into its mane. His body shakes with sobs. Tears stream down his face, soaking the horse's coat. The great thinker who proclaimed the death of God, who challenged every comfortable certainty of Western civilization, who demanded that humanity rise above itself, collapses to the cobblestones, weeping for a beaten horse. His landlord finds him there, confused and incoherent. They carry him back to his modest rooms. Over the next 2 days, Nietzsche writes a flurry of postcards, each more bizarre than the last. He signs them alternately as the Crucified and Dionysus. He claims to have ordered the German Kaiser shot. He declares himself the successor to the dead god. He announces that he has split history in two. His friend Jacob Burckhardt receives one of these letters and immediately knows something terrible has happened. Within days, Nietzsche is admitted to a psychiatric clinic with a diagnosis that will follow him into legend: 1866, syphilitic infection. The most productive year of his life had been the one immediately prior. After January 3rd, 1889, Friedrich Nietzsche never writes another word of philosophy. The remaining 11 years of his existence pass in what witnesses can only describe as a living death. He crouches in corners. He drinks his own urine in his confusion. Moments of terrible clarity alternate with periods where he recognizes no one, not even his own reflection. The man who wrote that what does not kill you makes you stronger is himself destroyed by forces beyond his understanding or control. But here is the question that haunts anyone who studies Nietzsche's life and thought. What drove this transformation? Was it simply disease, some biological catastrophe eating away at his brain? Or was there something else, something deeper and more terrifying? Did Friedrich Nietzsche glimpse something in the nature of existence itself that the human mind was never meant to see? Did his own philosophy, his own relentless pursuit of truth, no matter the cost, lead him to a precipice from which there was no return? Tonight, as you prepare for rest, we will trace the arc of Nietzsche's thought and life. We will explore his most profound and disturbing philosophical discovery, the concept he called eternal recurrence. We will examine how this idea, which he claimed was his greatest insight, may also have been the weight that crushed him. We will ask whether it is possible to stare too long into the abyss of existence, whether some truths are too heavy for the human soul to bear. This is not merely an academic exercise in the history of philosophy. This is a story about what happens when someone removes every comfortable illusion, every soothing lie, every protective barrier between consciousness and the raw fact of existence. It is about a man who insisted we must love our fate completely, who demanded we say yes to life in its totality, and who may have been destroyed by the very philosophy he created. The journey ahead will take us from the pious household where young Friedrich lost his father to mysterious brain disease, through the lonely mountain paths where revelation struck him like lightning, into the productive frenzy of his final working year. And finally, to that moment in Turin when everything shattered. We will encounter ideas that can change how you understand your own existence, questions that can keep you awake despite the late hour, and finally, perhaps a strange kind of peace that comes from confronting the most terrible possibilities without flinching. So settle in. Let the day's concerns fade into background noise. We are about to enter the mind of a man who dared to think the unthinkable, who insisted we face existence without the comfort of illusions, and who paid for this courage with his sanity. Whether his final collapse was tragedy, or, in some perverse way, a form of release, you will have to decide for yourself. The story begins not with madness, but with faith. Not with chaos, but with the strictest religious order. For to understand how Friedrich Nietzsche arrived at his devastating insights, we must first understand what he lost. October 15th, 1844. In the small Saxon village of Recurrence, near Leipzig, a son is born to Karl Ludwig Nietzsche, a Lutheran pastor, and his wife Franziska. They name him Friedrich Wilhelm, after the Prussian king whose birthday he shares. The household into which young Friedrich enters is one of absolute piety. His father serves the local parish with devotion. The rhythms of religious life structure every hour: prayer, scripture, service, submission to divine will. The boy shows remarkable sensitivity from his earliest years. He is quiet, thoughtful, intensely observant. His playmates call him the little pastor because of his serious demeanor and his habit of reciting scripture with perfect intonation. The family's life revolves entirely around the church, that ancient institution which promised to answer the deepest questions of human existence. Why are we here? What happens when we die? How should we live? The answers came with the authority of 2,000 years of tradition, backed by the promise of eternal reward or punishment. But when Friedrich is only 4 years old, something happens that will cast a shadow over his entire life. His father begins to suffer from strange symptoms: headaches, vision problems, confusion. The diagnosis of the time attributes it to softening of the brain. Within months, Pastor Karl Ludwig Nietzsche is dead at the age of 36. The following year, Friedrich's younger brother Joseph also dies at only 2 years old. The boy witnesses these losses with the acute awareness that will characterize his entire existence. His father, the source of all moral authority, the interpreter of God's will, the pillar of strength and certainty, collapses into illness and death. Later scholars would speculate about the cause. Some suggest it was a brain tumor. Others note the similarities to the symptoms Nietzsche himself would eventually display. Was there some inherited weakness, some genetic time bomb waiting to detonate? Whatever the medical reality, the psychological impact is profound. The boy who was raised to believe in divine providence, in a loving God who cares for each sparrow that falls, watches his father die in agony. He watches his little brother follow him into the grave. The questions that would drive his later philosophy are already forming in the quiet mind of this bereaved child. If God is good, why this suffering? If there is a plan, what possible justification could exist for such cruelty? If prayer has power, why did all their prayers fail? Friedrich's widowed mother moves the family to Naumburg, where they live in a household of women. His mother, his sister Elizabeth, his grandmother, and 2 maiden aunts. The boy grows up surrounded by intense feminine piety, by the constant devotions and submissions that characterized 19th century German Protestantism. He learns his Latin and Greek. He excels in his studies. By all external measures, he is the model of a well-brought-up young German scholar. But something is already growing inside him, some question he cannot quite articulate, some doubt that refuses to be silenced by the certainty of the adults around him. He is sent to Schulpforta, one of Germany's most prestigious boarding schools, where the classical curriculum shapes the finest minds of the generation. Here, he encounters the ancient Greeks, those pagans who lived before the Christian God imposed his moral order on Europe. He reads Homer and Hesiod, Plato and the pre-Socratics. He discovers a world where different values prevailed, where excellence and beauty and strength were celebrated, where the gods themselves were subject to fate. These ancient voices speak to something in him that the Christian teachings never quite reached. While his classmates dutifully memorize their catechism, Friedrich finds himself drawn to these older, stranger, more dangerous ideas. The Greeks did not promise eternal life. They did not comfort themselves with stories of divine justice. They looked at existence as it was in all its beauty and terror, and they created meaning through their own efforts, through art and competition and the cultivation of excellence. By the time he enters the University of Bonn in 1864 to study theology and classical philology, the young man is already wrestling with doubts that he barely dares to acknowledge even to himself. The great edifice of Christian belief that structured his childhood is developing cracks. Small ones at first. Questions about the historical reliability of Scripture, difficulties with the logical contradictions in traditional theology, discomfort with the life-denying aspects of Christian morality, the way it seemed to value suffering and submission over vitality and creativity. Then comes the decisive break. Within a year, Nietzsche abandons theology entirely and devotes himself solely to philology, the study of ancient texts. His mother is heartbroken. The family had assumed he would follow his father into the pastorate. But Friedrich cannot force himself to believe what his mind tells him is false. The God of his childhood, the comforting father figure who watches over his children, has become intellectually untenable. But losing faith is not a simple intellectual adjustment. For someone raised as Nietzsche was, it is more like losing gravity. Everything that gave life meaning and purpose was connected to that divine foundation. Moral values, the distinction between good and evil, the hope for justice, the consolation in suffering, the promise that life has ultimate meaning, all of this rested on the existence of God. Remove that foundation and what remains? This is the question that will haunt Nietzsche for the rest of his life. And it is not merely his personal question. He sees that all of European civilization is built on Christian foundations, even for those who no longer consciously believe. The Enlightenment thinkers who replaced religious authority with reason still maintained essentially Christian moral values. They still believed in progress, in the perfectibility of man, in the triumph of good over evil. They had removed God from the picture but kept all the conclusions that only made sense if God existed. Nietzsche's brilliance lies in seeing what this really means. If God is truly dead, not just as a personal belief but as a cultural foundation, then everything built on that foundation must eventually collapse. The comfortable certainties of his century, the faith in scientific progress and moral improvement, the belief that history is moving towards some better future, all of these are, in his view, residual Christianity, borrowed morality that has lost its justification. At the impossibly young age of 24, based on the strength of some philological papers he has written, Nietzsche is offered a professorship at the University of Basel. He has not even completed his doctorate. He has published almost nothing. Yet his genius is so evident that the university waives its normal requirements. The youngest professor in Europe takes up his position teaching classical philology to Swiss students. These should be triumphant years: professional success, financial security, intellectual stimulation. But Nietzsche's health begins its long deterioration. The headaches that plagued his childhood intensify, his eyesight weakens, he suffers from digestive problems, insomnia, and periodic bouts of depression so severe he cannot leave his darkened room for days at a time. Modern scholars debate the cause. Some believe he contracted syphilis in his youth, perhaps during a single visit to a brothel while he was a student. The medical records from his final collapse seem to support this. Others argue the symptoms do not quite fit, suggesting instead a brain tumor or inherited neurological disease. Whatever the physical cause, the effect is clear. Nietzsche lives in constant pain, physical and psychological, for most of his adult life. But it is during these difficult years in Basel that he makes a friend who will profoundly influence him, for better and worse. Richard Wagner, the great composer, lives nearby in Tribschen. Nietzsche is invited to visit. He is dazzled. Wagner represents everything the young professor admires: artistic genius, cultural ambition, the revival of Germanic mythology, the creation of something genuinely new in an age of imitation and mediocrity. The two men form an intense friendship. Nietzsche becomes a regular visitor to the Wagner household. He discusses philosophy with the composer. He plays the piano. He enters into the intoxicating world of artistic creation at the highest level. Wagner is creating his massive ring cycle, attempting to forge a new German culture through music and myth. Nietzsche sees in Wagner's project a possible answer to the death of God. Perhaps art can provide the meaning that religion once supplied. Perhaps beauty can redeem suffering. Perhaps the creation of new cultural forms can give humanity a purpose. In 1872, Nietzsche publishes his first book, The Birth of Tragedy. It is unlike any academic work anyone has seen before. Drawing on his classical training but writing with poetic passion, Nietzsche argues that Greek tragedy arose from the tension between two forces he names after Greek gods, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. Apollo represents order, rationality, clear forms, the principium individuationis. Dionysus represents chaos, ecstasy, the dissolution of boundaries, the unity of all life in nature's terrible beauty. According to Nietzsche, the greatest Greek art emerged when these opposing forces were held in creative tension, but Socrates and his student Plato, with their emphasis on pure reason and their suspicion of the passions, killed this vital spirit. Western philosophy was born from the death of tragedy, from the victory of the Apollonian over the Dionysian. Christianity, in Nietzsche's account, simply continued this life-denying tendency, devaluing the body and the passions in favor of a purely spiritual realm. The book is dedicated to Wagner, whom Nietzsche sees as potentially reviving this Dionysian spirit in modern culture. The academic establishment is scandalized. This is not proper philology. This is poetry, speculation, cultural criticism. One prominent professor warns his students to avoid Nietzsche's lectures. The young professor finds himself academically isolated, but he has found his voice. He is no longer content to be a scholar of dead texts. He will be a philosopher, a cultural physician diagnosing the sickness of modernity. But the friendship with Wagner, which seemed so promising, begins to sour. As Nietzsche's own thinking develops, he starts to see disturbing elements in Wagner's project. The nationalism, the anti-Semitism, the religious elements creeping into the operas, the cult of personality surrounding the composer. All of this begins to repel Nietzsche. Wagner's last opera, Parsifal, seems to Nietzsche like a capitulation to Christianity, a betrayal of the Dionysian spirit he thought Wagner embodied. The break, when it comes, is bitter. These two proud, difficult men cannot remain friends once their paths diverge. For Nietzsche, the rupture is personal and philosophical. Wagner represents a path not taken, a false answer to the problem of meaning in a godless world. Art alone cannot save us if it simply becomes another form of the old religious consolation. By 1879, Nietzsche's health has deteriorated so badly that he must resign his professorship. He is only 34 years old and his academic career is over. He lives on a modest pension, wandering between cheap boarding houses in Switzerland, Italy, and France, searching for climates that might ease his suffering. His days follow a punishing routine, writing in the early morning when his eyes can still focus, walking alone for hours regardless of weather, collapsing in the afternoon with blinding headaches. He estimates he loses about a third of each year to illness, spending days or weeks at a time in darkened rooms, unable to read or write, vomiting, half-blind with pain. Yet somehow, during this period of intense physical suffering, he produces book after book. Human, all too human. Daybreak. The Gay Science. Each one sharper, more radical, more willing to follow thoughts to their logical conclusion regardless of comfort or convention. He is utterly alone. No wife, no children, no permanent home, no colleagues, almost no friends. The few people who try to stay close to him find him increasingly difficult. His letters alternate between expressions of deep gratitude for any small kindness and bitter complaints about his isolation. He falls in love with Lou Salome, a brilliant young woman who would later become an important psychoanalyst. The relationship ends painfully, leaving Nietzsche even more isolated. In this loneliness and suffering, Nietzsche's thinking reaches deeper. He cannot comfort himself with the consolations available to others. He cannot believe in progress, in justice, in ultimate meaning. He has stripped away every illusion, every comforting lie. He stands naked before existence, seeing it clearly perhaps for the first time in his life, and he must find a way to say yes to what he sees. This is the context in which the thought comes to him, the thought he will later call the most important idea he ever had. It arrives not in the comfort of a library or the stimulation of discussion with peers, but in the mountains during one of his long, solitary walks, when he is further from human company than he has ever been. The thought strikes him with the force of revelation, and it will change everything. Before we can understand Nietzsche's great discovery, we must first grasp what he means by the death of God. And this phrase, more than any other, has defined his reputation. It appears in his work, The Gay Science, published in 1882, in one of the most dramatic passages in all of philosophy. Picture the scene. A madman appears in a marketplace on a bright morning, carrying a lit lantern. He runs through the crowd, crying out, "I seek God, I seek God." The people around him, many of whom are atheists or agnostics, find this amusing. They mock him. "Has God gotten lost?" one asks. "Did he lose his way like a child?" suggests another. "Is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage or emigrated?" The madman stops, stares at them, and delivers his terrible proclamation. "Where is God? I will tell you, we have killed him. You and I, all of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Where is it moving to now? Where are we moving to? Away from all suns. Are we not plunging continually, backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing in on us? The crowd falls silent, staring at him. The madman smashes his lantern on the ground. "I have come too early," he says. "My time is not yet." He walks away, leaving them in confused silence. Later that day, he goes to several churches and sings a requiem for God. When questioned, he replies, "What are these churches now, if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God?" This is not a triumphant proclamation of atheism. This is a warning, a prophecy of cultural catastrophe. Nietzsche is not celebrating the death of God. He is horrified by what he sees coming. The madman represents Nietzsche himself, the prophet who arrives too early, who sees what others have not yet grasped. Here is what most people misunderstand about Nietzsche's claim. When he says God is dead, he does not mean simply that enlightened people no longer believe in a divine being. He means something far more profound and disturbing. God, in Nietzsche's analysis, was never just a religious belief. God was the foundation of an entire system of meaning, value, and truth. For 2,000 years, Western civilization built everything on this foundation. The distinction between good and evil, established by God, the hope for ultimate justice, guaranteed by God, the meaning of suffering, explained by God, the purpose of human existence, ordained by God, the structure of morality, derived from God's commandments, the possibility of objective truth, grounded in God's perfect knowledge. Even those who thought they had moved beyond religion still relied on these foundations. The Enlightenment philosophers who replaced God with reason still believed in objective truth, moral progress, and the perfectibility of humanity. These were Christian ideas in secular dress. They had removed God from the picture, but kept all the furniture that only made sense in God's house. Nietzsche sees what they cannot see. If God truly is dead, if this foundation has collapsed, then everything built upon it must eventually fall. You cannot remove the bottom stone from an arch and expect the rest to stand. The comfortable certainties of modern Europe, the faith in science and progress, the assumption that history is moving towards something better, the belief in human rights and universal values, all of these are, in Nietzsche's analysis, residual Christianity. They are moral conclusions that have outlived their theological premises. This is why the madman asks, are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Without God, there is no fixed point of reference, no up or down, no objective standard by which to measure anything. We are floating free in space, and most people have not yet noticed. They still feel the floor beneath their feet, not realizing it is only the memory of solidity, the habit of walking on ground that is no longer there. The death of God represents not just a change in belief, but a transformation in the structure of reality itself, or at least in how humans experience reality. For centuries, meaning came from above. Values were discovered, not created. Truth was eternal and unchanging, but if God is dead, meaning must come from within. Values must be created, not discovered. Truth becomes perspectival, a matter of interpretation. This is why Nietzsche speaks of the shadow of God that will haunt Europe for centuries to come. Even after people stop believing in God explicitly, they will continue to believe in things that only make sense if God exists. They will believe in absolute moral values. They will believe in the dignity of every human being. They will believe that truth is better than lies, that compassion is virtuous, that justice should prevail. But why? If these are not divine commands, if they do not reflect the structure of reality ordained by a creator, where do they come from? Why should we value them? Nietzsche predicts that this realization, when it finally comes, will lead to a period of profound nihilism. People will recognize that their values have no foundation, that their moral beliefs are simply inherited prejudices with no claim to objective truth. Some will descend into despair, others will embrace a cynical relativism where nothing matters and everything is permitted. The cultural catastrophe will be massive. But Nietzsche is not content simply to diagnose the problem. Unlike many prophets of doom, he does not want to turn back, does not want to restore the old faith. He believes that the death of God, terrible as it is, also opens up new possibilities. If values are not given from above but must be created, then humanity has the chance to create better values, values that affirm life rather than denying it. This is why The Gay Science, the book where God is Dead appears, takes its title from an old term for poetry and music. The gay science is the joyful wisdom, the ability to say yes to life even in the face of terrible truths. Nietzsche wants to find a way to affirm existence without the consolation of God, without the promise of ultimate meaning or justice or redemption. But how? How can one live without these supports? How can one create values in a world where there are no objective standards? How can one affirm existence when it contains so much suffering, so much cruelty, so much meaningless pain? These are not abstract philosophical questions for Nietzsche. He lives them every day in his own suffering, in his isolation, in his knowledge that he has seen something that cannot be unseen. The answer, when it comes, arrives in the form of a thought so radical, so demanding, so psychologically intense, that Nietzsche himself is not sure whether it is a gift or a curse. It will be the centerpiece of his philosophical masterwork. It will become, in his view, the most important idea any human being has ever conceived. It will also perhaps contribute to his eventual destruction. In August of 1881, during one of his mountain walks, something happens to Friedrich Nietzsche that changes everything. The thought that has been circling in his unconscious, the answer to the question of how to affirm life completely, suddenly breaks through into consciousness with overwhelming force. The path winds along the shore of Lake Silvaplana in the Swiss Alps. The altitude is significant, about 6,000 feet above sea level. The air is thin, crisp, intoxicating. Nietzsche has been walking for hours, as he does almost every day, rain or shine, seeking relief from his headaches, losing himself in the rhythm of steps and breathing. He comes to a place where a massive rock towers upward like a pyramid. He stops. The beauty of the moment strikes him, the deep blue of the alpine lake, the eternal snows on the peaks, the absolute clarity of the air at this altitude. He is profoundly alone, further from other human beings than he can usually manage to get. In this solitude, this height, this stark beauty, something opens in his mind. The thought arrives not as a conclusion reached through logic, but as a vision, a revelation. Later, he will describe it as the most profound moment of his life. He will date it precisely. 6,000 feet beyond man and time. He will call it the eternal recurrence, and he will claim it is the central teaching of his philosophy, more important than anything else he ever wrote. Here is the thought in its simplest form. What if this life you are living, with every moment, every experience, every joy and suffering, every success and failure, every mundane detail, what if you had to live it again? Not just once more, but infinitely many times. The exact same life in the exact same sequence, with the exact same outcomes, repeating forever? Not reincarnation, which promises a different life based on your actions in this one. Not the cycle of eternal return found in some Eastern philosophies, where consciousness passes through different forms. No. The same life, your life exactly as it is, eternally recurring. Every time you die, you are born again to the same parents, make the same choices, experience the same events, arrive at the same end, and then the whole thing starts over. Every moment of boredom returns, every humiliation, every pain, every loss, but also every moment of joy, every achievement, every instant of beauty or pleasure. The embarrassing mistakes you made in your youth will happen again. The opportunities you missed will be missed again. The love you felt, the grief you endured, the hopes you cherished, the disappointments you suffered, all of it infinitely repeating. Standing by that pyramid-shaped rock, Nietzsche confronts this possibility, and it nearly destroys him. His notes from this period record his struggle with what he calls the abysmal thought. The idea is so psychologically overwhelming that he later writes of wrestling with it like Jacob wrestling with the angel. Will it bless him or break him? Consider what this means. Most philosophies and religions offer some form of redemption, some way out of suffering. Christianity promises eternal life in heaven where all tears are wiped away. Buddhism promises escape from the cycle of rebirth through enlightenment. Even secular progress ideologies promise that humanity is moving towards something better. All of these provide hope that the suffering of this life is temporary, that it serves some ultimate purpose, that there is an exit. Eternal recurrence offers no exit. Every pain you have ever felt will return an infinite number of times. Every failure will be repeated eternally. The loss of everyone you love will happen again and again without end. Your own death, whether peaceful or agonizing, is not a conclusion, but a pause before the whole thing starts again. Nietzsche later presents this as a thought experiment, asking, what if some demon crept into your loneliest loneliness and said to you, this life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more, and there will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh must return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. How would you react? Would you curse this demon? Would you fall into despair? Or could you respond with joy, embracing this eternal return of your life exactly as it is? Could you say, you are a god, and I have never heard anything more divine? This is Nietzsche's test. Your reaction reveals your relationship with your own existence. If the thought fills you with horror, if you would do anything to avoid living this life even one more time, then you are not living well. You are not truly affirming life. You are enduring existence, waiting for it to end, hoping for something better. But if you could embrace eternal recurrence, if you could want your life back infinitely many times, then you have achieved something extraordinary. You have overcome the natural human tendency to judge life by whether it leads somewhere better. You have learned to love existence for its own sake, not for any goal or purpose it might serve. This is what Nietzsche later calls amor fati, love of fate. Not resignation to fate, not acceptance of it, but active love of everything that happens, everything that is. The man of amor fati can look at his life in its totality, with all its suffering and all its joy, and say yes. He can affirm every moment because he affirms the whole, and in eternal recurrence, you cannot have the whole without every part. You cannot keep the joys while eliminating the sorrows. It is all or nothing, but there is something deeper and more disturbing in this concept. Nietzsche presents eternal recurrence not just as a thought experiment about how to live, but as a possible description of reality itself. In his notebooks, never published during his lifetime, he works out what he believes is a proof of eternal recurrence based on physics. The argument runs something like this. The universe contains a finite amount of matter and energy. This finite amount can only combine in a finite number of ways. But time is infinite. Therefore, every possible configuration must eventually repeat. We have infinite time stretching behind us, so every possible configuration has already occurred. We have infinite time stretching ahead of us, so every configuration will occur again, including this exact moment with you reading these words, with your specific thoughts and feelings, in this precise context. Modern physicists would likely reject this argument. The universe may be finite in time, beginning with the Big Bang. Quantum mechanics introduces true randomness, not just recombination of existing elements. The expansion of the universe may prevent any return to previous states. But for Nietzsche, the important question is not whether eternal recurrence is physically true, but whether you can live as if it is true. Imagine truly internalizing this idea. Every choice you make, you will make infinitely many times. Every word you speak will echo through eternity. Every moment of cruelty or kindness will return forever. Nothing is ever truly past because it will be present again. Nothing can be undone because it will be done again. This creates what Nietzsche calls the heaviest weight. Most people live thinking that each moment passes and is gone, dissolved into the past. We can make mistakes and move on. We can endure suffering knowing it will end. We can waste time thinking there is more time to come. But if every moment returns eternally, then the weight of every action is infinite. Nietzsche believes this thought can transform how people live. If you knew that your present moment would return infinitely, would you live it the same way? Would you waste the day? Would you defer your dreams? Would you remain in relationships that diminish you? Would you allow yourself to be consumed by resentment or bitterness? Or would you live with intensity, with courage, with amor fati? Would you create, love, strive, as if your choices matter infinitely because they echo through eternity? The eternal recurrence becomes a tool for evaluating your life. Ask yourself, do I want this life, this day, this hour, back again and again forever? If the answer is no, then something must change. But living this way requires tremendous strength. It means accepting responsibility for everything in your life, not in the sense of moral guilt, but in the sense of ownership. Your life is what it is. In eternal recurrence, it will always be what it is. You cannot escape it, cannot transcend it, cannot be redeemed from it. You can only affirm it or deny it, love it or hate it. Nietzsche stands by that rock in the Alps, and he sees all of this in a flash. He sees the psychological power of this thought, its potential to transform human existence. He also sees, though perhaps not consciously, the terrible burden it places on anyone who truly grasps it. To live in full awareness of eternal recurrence, to carry the weight of infinite repetition, requires a kind of strength that may be beyond what human psychology can sustain. In the weeks and months that follow, Nietzsche is consumed by this thought. He feels compelled to communicate it, to build an entire philosophy around it. He begins to plan what will become his most ambitious work, a strange hybrid of philosophy, poetry, and prophecy that he will call Thus Spoke Zarathustra. In this book, he will not argue for eternal recurrence in the manner of academic philosophy. He will present it as a teaching delivered by a prophet figure who descends from years of solitude to share what he has discovered. But even as he begins this work, even as he feels the creative fire that will drive him to complete it in a white heat of inspiration, something else is happening. The thought that seemed like liberation also becomes a kind of prison. To truly live with eternal recurrence, to carry this idea in your consciousness every day, is to live under a psychological weight that few can bear. Nietzsche has removed every comfort, every escape, every illusion. No God to give meaning, no afterlife to balance accounts, no progress towards something better. Just this life, exactly as it is, returning eternally. For someone already suffering as he suffers, already isolated as he is isolated, already bearing physical pain that consumes a third of his days, what does it mean to affirm that all of this will return forever? This is the question he must live with, the question he must somehow answer. And in attempting to answer it, in attempting to create a philosophy adequate to eternal recurrence, he will push himself to places few human minds have ventured. Whether he finds what he seeks or loses himself in the searching, we will discover as his story unfolds. Section 341 of The Gay Science gives us Nietzsche's most direct presentation of eternal recurrence, and it is worth contemplating slowly, letting each phrase sink in. he sets the scene with deliberate care. What if some demon crept into your loneliest loneliness? Note the emphasis on loneliness. Not your casual solitude, not a quiet evening at home, but your loneliest loneliness. That deep isolation where no social performance is required, where no one is watching, where you cannot hide from yourself. This is where the demon finds you, in that naked moment when you are most yourself, most vulnerable, most honest. The demon speaks this life as you now live it and have lived it. You will have to live once more and innumerable times more. There will be no variation, no improvement, no chance to correct mistakes. Every pain and every joy, every thought and sigh, every great moment and every tedious hour, all in the same succession and sequence. Nietzsche asks how this revelation would affect you. Would it crush you? Would you throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Or would you experience a tremendous moment when you reply, "You are a god, and I have never heard anything more divine"? The question is designed to function as a mirror. Your honest reaction reveals the truth about your relationship with your own existence. There is no point in lying to yourself here, in the loneliest loneliness where the demon finds you. Either you genuinely want your life back infinitely, or you do not. Either you can affirm existence as it is, or you are essentially waiting for life to be over. For most people, Nietzsche suggests, the honest answer would be horror. We endure existence rather than embrace it. We tell ourselves stories about how things will get better, how the suffering serves some purpose, how eventually we will arrive at a place where we can rest. But eternal recurrence destroys all such stories. There is no getting better, no purpose served, no arrival at rest. There is only this life, exactly as it is, repeating forever. Think about your own life for a moment. Think about the pettiness, the wasted time, the hours spent in resentment or anxiety or boredom. Think about the failures you have not forgiven yourself for, the opportunities you missed through fear or laziness, the relationships you let wither through neglect. Think about the ways you have been small, cowardly, mean. Now imagine that all of this will happen again, exactly as it happened, infinitely, many times. This is what Nietzsche calls the heaviest weight. It is not just that you must live your life again, it is that you must want to live it again. The thought of eternal recurrence is meant to impose such weight on your choices, such gravity on each moment, that you are forced to ask yourself, am I living in a way I could affirm eternally? The demon's pronouncement would, for most people, inspire a profound reevaluation. How well disposed would you have to become toward yourself and toward life to crave nothing more fervently than this ultimate eternal confirmation and seal? This is the key question. The eternal recurrence is not primarily a cosmological theory. It is a psychological tool, a way of measuring your orientation toward existence. Notice what Nietzsche is doing here. Most moral philosophies ask, what should I do? They provide rules, principles, guidelines for action. Utilitarianism says, maximize happiness. Kantian ethics says, act only on principles you could universalize. Christian morality says, follow God's commands. But Nietzsche's eternal recurrence asks a different question. What kind of person do you need to become to be able to affirm existence completely? This shifts the focus from specific actions to character, from moral rules to the state of your soul. You cannot change the past in eternal recurrence. Everything that has happened will happen again, but you can change your relationship to what has happened. You can transform from someone who resents and regrets to someone who affirms and embraces. This transformation is what Nietzsche calls amor fati, love of fate. It is not passive acceptance. It is not resignation. It is active, passionate love of everything that is, everything that has been, everything that will be. The person of amor fati looks at their life with all its beauty and ugliness, all its triumphs and disasters, and says yes, not just grudging acceptance, but genuine love. But how is this possible? How can you love the painful parts of your life? How can you embrace the losses, the failures, the suffering? Nietzsche's answer involves a radical shift in perspective. You must learn to see your life as a work of art, where every element, even the dark and difficult elements, contributes to the whole. Consider how an artist approaches their work. The painting needs shadow as well as light. The story needs conflict as well as resolution. The music needs tension as well as release. A life without suffering, without struggle, without pain would be like a painting with no shadows, flat, uninteresting, ultimately less beautiful than a life that encompasses the full range of human experience. This does not mean suffering is good. It means that suffering, when integrated into a complete life and affirmed as part of that life, can contribute to a kind of beauty or meaning that would not be possible without it. The person of amor fati has learned to see their entire existence as necessary, as inevitable, as exactly what it needed to be. They would not change a single thing because changing anything would make them someone else, and they have learned to love being exactly who they are. This is extraordinarily difficult. Most of us carry regret, wishes that things had been different. We look back and think, if only I had made that different choice, if only that tragedy had not occurred, if only I had been smarter, braver, kinder. But in the perspective of eternal recurrence and amor fati, all of this regret is a form of self-rejection. You are wishing to be someone other than who you are. Nietzsche challenges you to move beyond this, to say, I am who I am because of everything that has happened to me, every choice I made, every accident that befell me, every gift and every loss. This is me. This is my life. And I love it. I want it back infinitely. I would not change a single moment because every moment has led to this moment. And this moment is exactly where I need to be. The psychological implications are profound. Someone who has achieved this state of amor fati is liberated from resentment, from regret, from the constant background noise of wishing things were different. They have made peace with existence at the deepest level. They have learned the ultimate form of freedom, which is to want what is. But there is a darker side to this teaching that Nietzsche himself seems aware of. What if your life contains truly terrible elements? What if you have been the victim of cruelty, of injustice, of senseless suffering? The eternal recurrence demands that you affirm even this. There is no cosmic justice that will balance accounts, no afterlife where wrongs are righted, just this life with all its injustices repeating forever. Nietzsche is merciless in refusing to offer comfort here. He will not tell you that your suffering serves some higher purpose. He will not promise that things will work out in the end. The eternal recurrence strips away all such consolations. It presents you with existence as it is and demands that you learn to love it. If you cannot do this, if the pain is too great, if the injustice is too terrible, then you have not achieved the amor fati, and the thought of eternal recurrence will crush you. This is why Nietzsche speaks of the eternal recurrence as a kind of test. Not everyone can pass it. Not everyone should be expected to pass it. It requires a particular kind of strength, a particular capacity for life affirmation that may be rare. The person who can truly embrace eternal recurrence, who can genuinely say yes to existence in its totality, is what Nietzsche calls the Übermensch, the overman, the person who has overcome the all-too-human tendency to judge life by whether it lives up to our wishes. As you lie here preparing for sleep, Consider this question not as an abstract philosophical puzzle, but as something real. Your life, with everything it contains right now, eternally recurring. The relationship you are in, or the loneliness you feel. The work you do, or the aimlessness you suffer. The health you enjoy, or the pain you endure. The meaning you have found, or the void you face. All of it returning infinitely. Can you say yes? Not in some distant future when things improve, but right now to things exactly as they are. This is what Nietzsche asks of you. This is the weight he wants you to feel, the gravity that makes each moment matter infinitely. Because if each moment returns eternally, then no moment can be written off as mere preparation for something better. Every moment is the destination. Every moment is the purpose. Every moment is everything. The person who can truly grasp this, who can live with this awareness, has achieved something that Nietzsche believes is the highest possibility of human existence. They have become someone who can affirm life completely without reservations, without regrets, without resentments. They have transformed themselves from someone who endures existence into someone who celebrates it. But the question remains, can human psychology actually sustain this? Can a mind hold this awareness without breaking? Nietzsche himself will serve as the test case. In attempting to live according to his own philosophy, to embody amor fati in the face of terrible suffering, to maintain affirmation in the absence of all illusions, he will push himself to the absolute limits of what a human being can endure. And whether he succeeds or fails, whether he is strengthened or destroyed by his own insight, the world will witness. Before we follow him to that breaking point, we must meet the character who embodies these ideas most completely, the prophet figure through whom Nietzsche chose to communicate his most important teaching. We must encounter Zarathustra. Between 1883 and 1885, during some of the most difficult years of his life, Nietzsche produces what he considers his masterpiece. Thus Spoke Zarathustra, a book for all and none. The subtitle captures the paradox perfectly. It is for everyone because its message concerns the fundamental questions of human existence. It is for no one because perhaps no one is ready to hear it. The book is unlike anything in the history of philosophy. It is not an argument, not a systematic treatise, not a dialogue in the Socratic manner. It is a work of prose poetry, of prophecy, of philosophical fiction. Nietzsche writes in the style of the Bible, of sacred scripture, but he uses this style to proclaim ideas that overturn everything the Bible teaches. It is a deliberately blasphemous sacred text, a gospel of godlessness, a revelation of eternal return. The protagonist is Zarathustra, named after the ancient Persian prophet Zoroaster, who taught a dualistic worldview of good and evil, light and darkness. Nietzsche chooses this name precisely because the historical Zarathustra was the first to moralize the universe, to introduce the concept of absolute moral categories. Now Nietzsche's Zarathustra must undo this moralization, must teach humanity to go beyond good and evil, must proclaim the death of God and the eternal recurrence. The book begins with Zarathustra's descent. He has spent 10 years alone in the mountains, living in a cave above the world, accompanied only by his eagle and his serpent. But he has grown weary of his wisdom. Like a cup filled to overflowing, he must descend to humanity and share what he has learned. I must, like you, go under, he tells the sun. This play on words is crucial. Untergang in German means both descent and destruction. To bring his teaching to humanity, Zarathustra must descend from his mountain and perhaps be destroyed in the attempt. On his way down, he encounters an old saint living in the forest, a holy man who spends his days praising God and caring for nothing else. They speak briefly, and as they part, Zarathustra thinks to himself, could it be possible? This old saint in the forest has not yet heard that God is dead. The opening sets the stage for everything that follows. The world has changed, but most people have not yet noticed. Zarathustra brings news that will shake civilization to its foundations. He arrives in a town where people are gathered to watch a tightrope walker. Zarathustra takes the opportunity to give his first speech. He proclaims the Übermensch, the overman. I teach you the overman. Man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? The crowd listens, but does not understand. They mistake his teaching for a promise of some superhuman circus performer. When the tightrope walker falls and dies, Zarathustra carries the body away, realizing that he cannot speak to the masses. He must find individuals capable of understanding. The book unfolds in 4 parts, tracing Zarathustra's journey as a teacher, and more importantly, his own psychological struggle with his most difficult idea. Because Zarathustra does not simply arrive with eternal recurrence fully formed and embraced. He discovers it, wrestles with it, is nearly destroyed by it, and finally learns to love it. His journey mirrors Nietzsche's own. Throughout the first 2 parts, Zarathustra delivers various teachings about will to power, about self-overcoming, about the transformation of values, but the eternal recurrence remains in the background, not yet fully articulated. He speaks of it obliquely, hints at it, circles around it like someone approaching a fire too hot to touch directly. Then in the 3rd part, the teaching emerges explicitly. Zarathustra is walking with his animals, and a vision comes to him. He sees a gateway with 2 paths extending from it in opposite directions. One path leads infinitely into the past, the other infinitely into the future. The gateway is marked moment. Zarathustra asks, must not all things that can walk have walked this lane already? Must not all things that can happen have happened already, been done, passed by already? If time is infinite and everything that can happen must eventually happen, then this moment has occurred before and will occur again. Not just this moment, but every moment, in eternal succession. The thought strikes Zarathustra with such force that he cannot continue. He collapses. His animals find him and care for him as he struggles with what he calls the abysmal thought. For 7 days, Zarathustra lies wrestling with the eternal recurrence. His animals try to comfort him, to turn it into something manageable, something philosophical rather than existential. But Zarathustra knows the truth. He has seen something that cannot be unseen, grasped something that cannot be released. The eternal recurrence is not just an interesting idea. It is a burden, a responsibility, a weight that threatens to crush him. The horror that afflicts Zarathustra is not just that his life will repeat. It is that all life will repeat, including the lowest, pettiest, most mediocre aspects of human existence. The small man, with all his small thoughts and small pleasures and small cruelties, will return eternally. The same stupidity, the same cowardice, the same mediocrity, over and over without end. This is the nausea that nearly destroys Zarathustra. He has taught the Übermensch the idea that humanity might overcome itself and become something greater. But in eternal recurrence, even the possibility of progress is an illusion. Everything that has been will be again, exactly as it was. The overman will arrive, yes, but so will all the countless generations of the merely human, the all-too human, the disgustingly human. Zarathustra must learn to affirm even this, not just his own life, not just the lives of the noble and strong, but all of existence in its totality. That the eternal recurrence demands total affirmation or none at all. You cannot cherry-pick what returns. You cannot say yes to the good parts and no to the bad parts. It is everything or nothing. How does Zarathustra overcome this horror? How does he move from nausea to affirmation? Nietzsche shows us the transformation through a series of visions and encounters. Zarathustra must learn to love life so completely that he desires its eternal return. He must achieve amor fati at such a profound level that even the return of everything he despises becomes acceptable because it is part of the whole, and he loves the whole. The transformation reaches its climax in a section called the Drunken Song, which takes place at midnight, the moment when past and future meet. Zarathustra and his friends are celebrating, and in his intoxication Zarathustra reveals the deepest secret. All joy wants eternity, wants deep eternity. This is the key insight. Joy is not satisfied with momentary pleasure. True joy wants what it joys in to last forever. When you experience genuine happiness, genuine connection, genuine meaning, you do not think, "I am glad this is temporary." You think, "I wish this could last forever." But in a world where everything passes, where all moments dissolve into the past, this wish seems impossible. Eternal recurrence transforms the impossible into reality. If you can learn to joy in existence itself, to find meaning and beauty in life as a whole rather than in isolated moments, then eternal recurrence gives you exactly what you desire. Everything returns. Nothing is truly lost. Every moment of joy, every moment of beauty, every moment of meaning comes back infinitely, but this requires learning to joy in suffering as well, because suffering is part of existence. It requires seeing your worst moments not as interruptions of life's meaning, but as integral to it. The great artist of life learns to love the whole composition, with all its dissonance and discord, not just the pleasant melodies. Zarathustra reaches this understanding through a kind of spiritual intoxication, through allowing himself to feel the fullness of existence without the usual defenses and evasions. He stops trying to improve life, to redeem it, to justify it. He simply loves it, wants it, embraces it completely. And in doing so, he discovers that the thought, which seemed to carry only nausea, actually carries the deepest possible joy. The fourth and final part of Thus Spoke Zarathustra shows the prophet dealing with a different challenge. He has achieved his own affirmation, but can he help others achieve it? He encounters what he calls higher men, people who have outgrown conventional beliefs but have not yet found anything to replace them. They are suffering from what Nietzsche identifies as nihilism, the sense that life has no meaning. Zarathustra tries to teach them. He offers them his wisdom, his amor fati, his eternal recurrence. But they struggle to understand. They turn it into something comfortable, something that resembles the old religious consolations. They want him to be their new prophet, to give them new commandments, to tell them how to live. But this is precisely what Zarathustra refuses to do. The book ends ambiguously. Zarathustra realizes that he must leave his disciples, that they must find their own way. He has taught what he can teach. Whether anyone can truly hear it, truly live it, remains an open question. He returns to his cave, to his solitude, ready to continue his own journey of self-overcoming. For Nietzsche himself, the composition of Thus Spoke Zarathustra is both triumph and torment. He writes large sections of it in creative frenzies that last only days. The first part takes him 10 days. The language flows from him with an ease and power he has never experienced before. He feels possessed, as if something is writing through him rather than him writing it. But this creative possession is also exhausting, even dangerous. To write this book, Nietzsche must inhabit the consciousness of Zarathustra, must feel what Zarathustra feels, must wrestle with the eternal recurrence as Zarathustra wrestles with it. He is not describing these struggles from a safe distance. He is living them, embodying them, allowing his own psyche to be the laboratory where these ideas are tested, and there is a cost. The creative highs are followed by periods of devastating depression. The insights that seem so luminous in the moment of writing become crushing weights when he tries to live with them day after day. Nietzsche wants to be Zarathustra, wants to achieve the complete affirmation that his character achieves. But he is not Zarathustra. He is a sick, lonely man, suffering from constant pain, isolated from almost all human contact, facing a world that shows no interest in his work. Can he affirm all of this? Can he say yes to the migraines that blind him for days at a time, to the poverty that forces him into ever cheaper lodgings, to the isolation that sometimes drives him to despair? Can he love this fate? This is the question he must answer, not in the pages of a book, but in the lived reality of his existence. The eternal recurrence demands that he do more than understand it intellectually. He must embody it, must live it, must transform himself into someone capable of affirming existence completely. This transformation requires a kind of psychological strength that may be beyond human capacity. Nietzsche is attempting to live at a pitch of intensity, a level of consciousness that no one has sustained before. In his letters from this period, we see glimpses of the struggle. He writes of premonitions of madness. He compares himself to a machine that might explode. He speaks of descending into depths where he might lose himself. But he also speaks of the necessity of this descent, of the search for some alchemist's trick of turning filth into gold. He must find a way to transmute his suffering into something valuable, must learn to see it not as an obstacle to meaning, but as the very substance from which meaning is created. This is the task he sets himself. This is the experiment he conducts on his own consciousness. And in attempting it, in pushing himself to live according to the philosophy of eternal recurrence and amor fati, he is venturing into psychological territory where few have gone before. The pressure is immense. The demands are absolute, and the possibility of failure, of being crushed by the very ideas he has created, is very real. To understand Nietzsche's complete philosophy and to see how eternal recurrence fits into his broader vision, we must explore another of his central concepts, the will to power. This idea, like eternal recurrence, is often misunderstood, often distorted, and absolutely essential to grasping what Nietzsche was trying to achieve. The phrase will to power sounds aggressive, even violent. It brings to mind images of domination, of strong individuals crushing the weak, of might making right. And indeed, Nietzsche's philosophy was later appropriated by fascist ideologies that read it exactly this way. But this is a profound misreading. The will to power, as Nietzsche conceived it, is something far more subtle and far more universal than simple domination. Nietzsche developed this concept partly in response to Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher who had been something like a father figure to him in his youth. Schopenhauer had proposed that the fundamental drive in all living things is the will to live, a blind, aimless striving to continue existing. But Schopenhauer viewed this will pessimistically. Life, in his philosophy, is fundamentally suffering because the will can never be satisfied. We are driven by desires that, when fulfilled, bring only temporary relief before new desires arise. The only escape from this treadmill of suffering is to deny the will, to practice asceticism, to extinguish desire itself. Nietzsche found this philosophy both compelling and repulsive. Compelling because Schopenhauer saw clearly that life involves suffering and that simple hedonistic pursuit of pleasure cannot provide lasting satisfaction. Repulsive because Schopenhauer's solution was essentially giving up, denying life, seeking escape through renunciation. But Nietzsche also saw that Schopenhauer had misidentified the fundamental drive. It is not primarily the will to live, A creature already alive does not need to will its own existence. It is already existing. What creatures actually do is strive to enhance their power, to expand their capacities, to overcome obstacles, to grow stronger. Even acts that seem to involve self-sacrifice or self-denial can be understood as expressions of the will to power when you see that they serve to enhance some aspect of the organism's strength or influence. The will to power is the drive to overcome resistance, to master challenges, to expand and intensify one's capacities. It operates at every level of existence, from the simplest organisms to the most complex human endeavors. A plant grows toward light, pushing against gravity, expanding its structure. This is will to power. An animal defends its territory, establishes dominance within its social group, develops new capacities. This is will to power. A human being learns a skill, creates a work of art, builds a business, forms relationships, pursues understanding. All of this is will to power. Crucially, the will to power is not primarily about power over others. It is about power over oneself, about self-overcoming, about becoming more than you currently are. The highest expression of will to power is not the tyrant who dominates others, but the creator who masters themselves, who transforms their own nature, who channels their drives into something productive and beautiful. Consider an artist working on a painting. They are not trying to dominate anyone. They are wrestling with their medium, with their own limitations, with the gap between their vision and their current capability. Every brushstroke is an act of will to power, the attempt to impose form on chaos, to create meaning where none existed before, to express something that could not be expressed without this particular effort at this particular moment. Or consider a person overcoming an addiction, learning to master impulses that previously controlled them. This is will to power in its purest form, the self divided against itself, the higher aspects of personality wrestling with the lower and gradually achieving mastery. The victory is not over some external enemy, but over one's own nature, one's own weakness. Nietzsche sees this dynamic operating throughout human psychology. When philosophers claim to seek truth objectively, dispassionately, for its own sake, Nietzsche sees instead the will to power expressing itself. They want to feel the sense of mastery that comes from understanding, the pleasure of solving intellectual puzzles, the satisfaction of believing they have achieved certainty. Even the ascetic, the person who denies bodily pleasures and worldly success, is expressing will to power, the power to dominate their own desires, to feel superior to those who remain enslaved by appetite. This insight allows Nietzsche to reinterpret much of human behavior and culture. Moral systems are expressions of will to power. Some people feel powerful by dominating others physically. Others feel powerful by imposing moral judgments, by making others feel guilty, by claiming superior virtue. Christianity, in Nietzsche's controversial reading, represents the will to power of the weak. Those who cannot dominate physically or politically create a moral system where their own qualities, humility, meekness, poverty, are called virtues, and the qualities of the strong, pride, power, wealth, are called vices. This is what Nietzsche means by slave morality versus master morality. Master morality is the value system of those who feel powerful and express their will to power directly through creativity, action, and self-assertion. They call good what enhances life and power, and bad what diminishes it. Slave morality is the value system of those who feel powerless and express their will to power indirectly through moral judgment. They call evil everything they resent in the powerful, and good their own qualities of submission and suffering. But, and this is crucial, Nietzsche is not simply celebrating master morality and condemning slave morality. He is trying to analyze them, to show them both as expressions of the same fundamental drive, and he sees that slave morality, however much it disguises itself as pure selflessness, is also will to power, just expressed through different means. The will to power connects intimately with eternal recurrence. If will to power is the fundamental drive, the constant striving to enhance and expand, then eternal recurrence presents a challenge. Will your will to power affirm existence eternally? Can you create, strive, and overcome in such a way that you would want it all back infinitely? The connection becomes clearer when you think about what kind of person could affirm eternal recurrence. Someone consumed by resentment cannot do it. Resentment is tied to wishing things had been different. Someone driven primarily by escape or avoidance cannot do it. Eternal recurrence means no escape is possible. Someone who lives for some future redemption cannot do it. Eternal recurrence means the future just repeats the past and present. The only person who can genuinely affirm eternal recurrence is someone whose will to power expresses itself through creation, through self-overcoming, through amor fati. Someone who experiences their own striving not as a burden to be relieved, but as the very meaning of existence. Someone whose power comes not from dominating others or escaping themselves, but from becoming who they fully are. This is what Nietzsche means by the Übermensch, the overman. Not a biological superman or a political tyrant, but a psychological ideal, the person who has overcome the all-too-human need for cosmic justice, for ultimate meaning given from outside, for consolation and escape. The overman is the one whose will to power has achieved complete self-direction, who creates values rather than receiving them, who says yes to existence in its totality. But creating this psychological ideal is one thing, becoming it is another. Nietzsche sets this goal for himself. He wants to embody the philosophy he teaches. He wants to live with such intensity of will to power, such complete amor fati, such perfect affirmation of eternal recurrence, that his life becomes an artwork, a demonstration of what is possible for human consciousness. The pressure of this self-imposed demand is enormous. He is not just writing philosophy, he is attempting a transformation of his own, being at the most fundamental level. He must take his suffering, and he suffers terribly constantly, and somehow transform it into an expression of will to power. He must take his isolation, his poverty, his lack of recognition, and somehow affirm it as necessary, as contributing to his strength rather than diminishing it. In his writings from the mid-1880s, we can see this struggle playing out. He pushes himself to more and more extreme formulations. He attacks Christianity with increasing vehemence, seeing in it the systematization of everything that denies life. He criticizes German culture, modern morality, democratic ideals, anything that seems to him to represent the victory of the weak over the strong, the resentful over the creative, the life-denying over the life-affirming. Some of this writing is brilliant, offering insights into human psychology that remain valuable. Some of it is disturbing, particularly his occasional remarks that seem to celebrate cruelty or dismiss compassion. Scholars debate whether these extreme moments reflect Nietzsche's actual views or are rhetorical provocations meant to shock readers out of their comfortable assumptions. What is clear is that Nietzsche is driving himself harder and harder, thinking more and more intensely, pushing against the limits of what philosophy has traditionally allowed itself to say. He is trying to think beyond good and evil, to analyze morality from outside any moral framework, to see human existence without the consoling illusions that make it bearable for most people. And something is beginning to happen to him. The letters from 1887 and 1888 show signs of increasing grandiosity. He begins to speak of himself as a historical figure of immense importance. He predicts that his works will cause earthquakes, will transform human civilization, will mark the dividing point of history. Some of this might be justified confidence. Nietzsche did indeed become enormously influential, but the language becomes more and more extreme, the claims more and more extravagant. Is this just a brilliant mind becoming more confident in its insights, or is it the beginning of something darker, some psychological pressure building toward a breaking point, the will to power pushed to its extreme, tested against the weight of eternal recurrence, demanded to maintain amor fati in the face of terrible suffering? Can human psychology sustain this? Or does the attempt to embody these ideas eventually shatter the person attempting it? We are approaching the critical year, the year when Nietzsche's productivity reaches its peak and then explodes into something else entirely. The year when the line between philosophical intensity and psychological crisis becomes impossible to draw. 1888 begins inauspiciously. Nietzsche is living in Turin, Italy, drawn there by the mild climate and inexpensive lodgings. His health remains precarious. His eyes trouble him constantly, making reading and writing painful. His migraines continue their punishing rhythm. He has few friends, little money, and almost no readers. His books sell in the dozens, not hundreds, and certainly not thousands. He is, by any conventional measure, a failure, but something is happening inside him. Some creative force is gathering, some pressure building toward release. By his own account, he feels different this year. He describes moments of euphoria, of certainty, of feeling himself on the verge of something momentous. Turin pleases him in ways he cannot quite explain: the architecture, the light, the civilized atmosphere of the cafes. He takes long walks, thinks with unusual clarity, feels his ideas crystallizing with unprecedented force. Then the dam breaks. Between February and October of this year, Nietzsche produces an extraordinary amount of work. Not rough drafts or fragmentary notes, but finished books, polished prose, sustained arguments. He completes The Case of Wagner, a devastating critique of the composer who was once his friend and ideal. He writes Twilight of the Idols, where he systematically dismantles the central idols of Western philosophy: Socrates, Plato, Christianity, modern morality. He produces The Antichrist, perhaps his most vitriolic attack on Christianity, where he calls it the one great curse, the one great corruption, the one immortal blemish of humanity. And finally, in October, he writes Ecce Homo, an autobiography that is unlike any autobiography ever written. Its chapter titles give a sense of its tone. Why I am so wise, why I am so clever, why I write such good books, why I am a destiny. This is not false modesty. This is Nietzsche declaring with full seriousness that he represents a turning point in human history, that his ideas will transform civilization, that future centuries will date themselves from his works. Consider what it means to produce this volume of high-quality philosophical work in 9 months. Each of these books is dense, carefully crafted, full of original insights and devastating critiques. Nietzsche is not simply recording thoughts as they come. He is shaping them, refining them, finding the perfect expression for complex ideas. This requires immense mental energy and sustained concentration, especially given his physical condition. Yet he does it. Moreover, he does it with a sense of joy, even intoxication. His letters from this period speak of walking through Turin, unable to control his laughter, of feeling euphoric for no apparent reason, of experiencing life with an intensity he has never known before. Something has been unleashed in him, some force that will not be contained. But what is this force? Is it simply creative genius finally finding its full expression? Nietzsche himself believes he is experiencing a kind of breakthrough, a vindication of his philosophy. He has practiced amor fati, has wrestled with eternal recurrence, has disciplined his will to power. Now perhaps he is reaping the reward, a state of consciousness where life affirmation becomes natural, where creativity flows freely, where he has become, in some measure, the Übermensch he has described, or is something else happening? Modern readers, knowing what comes next, cannot help but see ominous signs. The grandiosity that pervades Ecce Homo goes beyond confidence. When Nietzsche writes that his book, Zarathustra, stands alone among books, that nothing like it has ever been written, that it is the greatest gift ever given to humanity, we can see either profound insight into his own achievement or the first signs of delusion. His letters become increasingly strange. He writes to his friend Franz Overbeck that he feels himself at a turning point, that something decisive is about to happen. He mentions that his health has been extraordinarily good this year, better than in decades, but he also expresses fears. In one letter he writes, "The problem of my health is such that, without exaggeration, I can say that my life depends on overcoming this crisis." What crisis? He does not specify, but the word itself is telling. In November, his letters take on a more alarming character. He writes to one friend about having the German emperor shot. He signs letters with names other than his own. He sends postcards with bizarre declarations. Those who receive them are confused, concerned, but they are far away, and they do not yet understand the magnitude of what is happening. The style of his final writings gives us clues. They are becoming increasingly apocalyptic, increasingly prophetic, increasingly megalomaniacal. Nietzsche has always written with passion and conviction, but now there is a quality of frenzy, of unconstrained assertion, of claiming world historical importance without qualification or modesty. He is not arguing for his ideas, he is proclaiming them with the authority of someone who believes he has seen ultimate truth. The Antichrist provides a particularly revealing example. The book attacks Christianity with relentless venom. Nietzsche calls Christianity the one great intrinsic depravity, the one immortal blemish of mankind. He traces what he sees as its poisonous influence through history, its devaluation of life, its resentment against excellence and power, its celebration of weakness and suffering. Whether or not one agrees with Nietzsche's critique, the tone is striking. This is not dispassionate analysis. This is passionate denunciation, sustained fury directed at a religious tradition that has shaped Western civilization for 2 millennia. What drives such fury? Is it philosophical conviction, or is it something more personal, some resentment that has been building through all his years of suffering, all his years of feeling that life has denied him recognition, health, companionship? Ecce Homo is even more revealing. In this book, Nietzsche reviews his own works, explaining what he intended and what he achieved, but he does so with a tone of absolute certainty about his own importance. He writes, "I am not a man, I am dynamite." He predicts that his name will be associated with a crisis like nothing humanity has ever seen before. He claims that his book, Zarathustra, will require a new human type to understand it, that conventional people will never grasp its meaning. Again, with hindsight, some of this seems prophetic. Nietzsche did become enormously influential. His ideas did shake Western philosophy. His work was associated with cultural crises, with world wars, with the questioning of every comfortable assumption. But at the time he writes this, he is an unknown professor living in obscurity. The gap between his claims and his circumstances is vast. Is he seeing the future with remarkable clarity, or is he constructing a delusional narrative to protect himself from the pain of his actual situation? There are moments in these final works where Nietzsche seems aware of his own extremity. He occasionally qualifies his statements, acknowledges that he may sound mad, even jokes about it. "Please do not confuse me with humanity," he writes in Ecce Homo. There is self-awareness here, a sense that he knows he has gone beyond normal boundaries of thought and expression. But there is also a quality of compulsion, of not being able to stop himself. The writing pours out of him with an urgency that suggests he feels time running out. He must get these ideas recorded, must complete his philosophical project, must leave a testament for humanity before what? He does not say explicitly, but the sense of impending crisis pervades everything. In late November and early December, his behavior in Turin becomes noticeably strange. He walks through the streets in a state of barely controlled euphoria. He has difficulty stopping himself from laughing aloud at inappropriate moments. He feels, he later tells a friend, as if he is constantly on the verge of some tremendous experience, some transformation or revelation. On December 30th, he writes what might be his last coherent letter. It is addressed to Peter Gast, his friend and occasional secretary. The letter is strange, but not yet completely incoherent. He speaks of his work, of his plans, but with an intensity and grandiosity that exceeds even his recent letters. He seems to be approaching some edge, some boundary beyond which ordinary consciousness cannot go. 3 days later, on January 3rd, 1889, everything collapses. Whatever pressure has been building, whatever force has been unleashed in this extraordinary year of productivity, breaks through the final barriers of Nietzsche's sanity. The machine that he warned might explode finally detonates. The question that haunts anyone studying this period is, what was the relationship between Nietzsche's philosophy and his breakdown? Can we separate the brilliant insights of 1888 from the approaching madness? Were these final works the flowering of genius or the first symptoms of disease? Modern psychiatry would likely say disease. The syphilis diagnosis, if accurate, suggests that spirochetes had been dormant in his nervous system for decades and finally became active, attacking his brain. Or if the alternative diagnoses are correct, brain tumor, frontotemporal dementia, inherited vascular disease, then biological processes were destroying his cognitive functions regardless of his philosophical preoccupations. But the timing is too striking to ignore completely. Nietzsche spent 8 years developing and attempting to live according to a philosophy of extreme life affirmation in the absence of all cosmic consolation. He tried to maintain amor fati while suffering constant physical pain. He attempted to affirm eternal recurrence while living in isolation and poverty. He pushed his will to power to create values and meaning in a godless universe. This is not a comfortable philosophy. It is not designed to make life easier. It demands an almost superhuman psychological strength, and Nietzsche demanded this strength of himself constantly, refusing the comforts and illusions that make existence bearable for most people. Is it possible that this philosophical project, however brilliant in conception, placed unbearable pressure on human psychology? That attempting to embody these ideas contributed to the breakdown, even if it did not cause it outright. We cannot know with certainty, but we can see that in his final productive months, Nietzsche was living at an extraordinary pitch of intensity, thinking thoughts that few had dared to think, pushing against the boundaries of what philosophy had traditionally attempted. Whether this intensity revealed truth or produced delusion, whether it was the culmination of genius or the beginning of catastrophe, the world was about to witness. The morning of January 3rd, 1889, arrives cold and clear in Turin. Nietzsche leaves his lodgings for one of his customary walks. In the Piazza Carlo Alberto, a scene is unfolding that will mark the end of his philosophical career and the beginning of his final descent. The coachman is having trouble with his horse. The animal is stubborn this morning, refusing to pull the carriage. Perhaps the cold has made it irritable, or perhaps some instinct warns it that something in the atmosphere has changed. The coachman's patience runs out. He raises his whip. The sound of leather striking flesh cracks through the square. Friedrich Nietzsche is crossing the piazza when he hears this. He stops. Something in him responds to the horse's suffering with an immediacy, an intensity that overwhelms all other considerations. Later, witnesses will struggle to describe what happened. Did he cry out? Did he run? The details blur, but the essential fact remains clear. He throws himself at the horse. His arms encircle the animal's neck. His face presses into its mane. And then he begins to weep. Not quiet tears, but convulsive sobs, the kind that shake the entire body, that seem to come from some depth beyond normal grief. The great philosopher who proclaimed the death of God, who demanded hardness and strength, who rejected pity as weakness, collapses against a beaten horse and cries as if his heart is breaking. The crowd gathers. They do not understand what they are seeing. Who is this strange man? Why does he react this way to something so ordinary, so commonplace? In 1889, Turin, horses are beaten regularly. No one considers this remarkable, but Nietzsche seems to experience it as an unbearable cruelty, an injustice that destroys his composure completely. His landlord, Davide Fino, arrives to find Nietzsche on the ground, barely coherent. With the help of others, he manages to get the philosopher back to his lodgings at Via Carlo Alberto VI. Once there, Nietzsche retreats to his room and does not emerge. For 2 days he remains largely silent, occasionally making strange sounds, sometimes sitting completely still for hours, but he writes. In the grip of whatever is happening to him, he composes postcards he writes to friends, to acquaintances, to public figures. The messages are bizarre, cryptic, sometimes signed with his own name, sometimes with others. He signed some the Crucified, others Dionysus. He announces that he has ordered the German Kaiser shot, that he has had the Pope imprisoned, that he is having all anti-Semites arrested. One card goes to Jakob Burckhardt, the historian who had been friendly with Nietzsche during his Basel years. It reads, "Dear Professor, in the end I would much rather be a Basel professor than God, but I have not dared carry my private egoism so far as to desist, for its sake, from the creation of the world. You see, one must make sacrifices however and wherever one lives." It is signed Nietzsche Caesar. Another goes to his friend Cosima Wagner, the widow of Richard Wagner. Ariadne, I love you, Dionysus. The mythological reference is characteristic of Nietzsche, but the context makes it disturbing rather than poetic. To Peter Gast he writes, "Sing me a new song, the world is transfigured and all the heavens rejoice, the crucified." These messages alarm everyone who receives them. Burckhardt immediately takes his card to Franz Overbeck, Nietzsche's closest friend, who lives in Basel. Overbeck recognizes that something terrible has happened. He makes immediate arrangements to travel to Turin. When Overbeck arrives on January 7th, he finds Nietzsche in a state that fills him with horror and pity. Sometimes the philosopher seems to recognize him, greeting him warmly, speaking coherently for brief periods. At other times he descends into confusion, making grandiose declarations, lapsing into strange behaviors. He performs a crude dance at one point. He improvises on the piano, producing discordant sounds. He speaks of himself in the third person, referring to Nietzsche as someone else, someone he has surpassed or absorbed. The next day, Overbeck manages to transport Nietzsche by train back to Basel. The journey is difficult. Nietzsche sometimes cooperates, sometimes resists. He makes scenes in the station, attracting concerned attention from other travelers. But finally, they arrive, and on January 9th, Nietzsche is admitted to the Friedrich psychiatric clinic in Basel. The admitting physician records, Friedrich Nietzsche, professor, aged 44, from Nice, religion, Protestant, 1866, syphilite, infect. This single line, 1866, syphilitic infection, will shape how Nietzsche's collapse is understood for more than a century. The diagnosis suggests that he contracted syphilis as a young man, perhaps at age 22, and that the disease has now entered its tertiary stage, attacking his brain. Tertiary syphilis, if untreated, produces a condition called general paresis of the insane. The symptoms include delusions of grandeur, progressive dementia, personality changes, and eventually complete mental collapse followed by death. The timeline fits. The symptoms match. For generations, scholars and physicians will accept this explanation as obvious, as proven. But there are problems with the diagnosis. For one thing, Nietzsche does not show all the typical signs of neurosyphilis. He lacks the characteristic eye symptoms, unequal pupils, loss of reflexes. His dementia does not follow the typical progressive course. Most significantly, he lives for 11 more years after his collapse, whereas untreated neurosyphilis typically kills within 3 to 5 years. Some modern researchers have proposed alternative diagnoses, perhaps a brain tumor, which would explain both the headaches that plagued him all his life and the sudden catastrophic change in mental status. Perhaps frontotemporal dementia, which can cause personality changes, behavioral disinhibition, and creative bursts before cognitive decline. Perhaps a genetic vascular condition called CADASIL, which causes strokes and progressive dementia, and was common in families with the kind of history Nietzsche's family displayed. We will never know with certainty. Nietzsche's body was not preserved for modern analysis. The medical records are incomplete. We have only the external symptoms, the behavior, the trajectory, from philosophical brilliance to complete incapacity. What caused this transformation remains, at some level, a mystery. But perhaps the medical question is not the most important one. Perhaps we should ask instead about the phenomenology, the lived experience of what happened to Nietzsche in that piazza. What was he feeling when he embraced the horse? What was he thinking in those 2 days before Overbeck arrived? What was the subjective reality of his final lucid moments before consciousness dissolved into chaos? Some have seen the horse incident as symbolically fitting. The man who preached hardness and strength collapses in compassion for a suffering animal. The philosopher who criticized pity as weakness is destroyed by an excess of pity. There is a kind of poetic justice in this, as if Nietzsche's philosophy was refuted by his own involuntary response to suffering. But perhaps that reading is too simple. Perhaps what broke Nietzsche was not compassion itself, but the sudden crumbling of the defenses he had built against feeling too much. He had spent years disciplining himself, hardening himself, trying to achieve amor fati in the face of terrible suffering. He had constructed an entire philosophy designed to make life bearable without illusions, and perhaps in that moment in Turin, all of those defenses collapsed at once. The horse was not just a horse, it was himself. It was every beaten, suffering creature in a godless universe where pain has no meaning, no purpose, no redemption. It was the reality he had been trying to affirm, trying to say yes to, and in that moment he could not do it. The weight was too great. The eternal recurrence of senseless cruelty broke him. Or perhaps the breakdown had nothing to do with the horse. Perhaps biological processes had been destroying his brain for months or years, and the horse incident was simply the moment when the damage reached a critical threshold. The timing was coincidence. The symbolism is imposed by those who came later, who cannot resist finding meaning in the collapse of a philosopher who spent his life examining the problem of meaning. We project onto Nietzsche's breakdown what we need to believe. Those who think philosophy is dangerous point to him as a warning. See what happens when you think too deeply, when you question too radically, when you remove all comfortable illusions. Those who believe mental illness is purely biological point to him as evidence. Genius and madness have nothing to do with each other. It was just disease, just chemistry, just bad luck. The truth is probably more complex than either narrative allows. Nietzsche was attempting something extraordinarily difficult: to live according to a philosophy of complete life affirmation without any of the traditional supports. He was also suffering from some kind of progressive biological condition. These two facts are both true. They coexist. They probably interacted in ways we cannot fully untangle. What we know is that on January 3rd, 1889, Friedrich Nietzsche's career as a philosopher ended. Whatever had driven him through those 8 months of extraordinary productivity was spent. Whatever pressure had built up through his years of wrestling with eternal recurrence released itself in a way that shattered his conscious mind. The machine he feared might explode had exploded, and what remained would no longer be recognizable as the Friedrich Nietzsche who had written those books, who had thought those thoughts, who had dared to proclaim the death of God and the eternal return of all things. The man who collapsed in the Turin piazza was gone. What would exist for the next 11 years was something else, a kind of living absence, a presence without consciousness, a body that continued while the mind that had animated it was destroyed or dormant, or perhaps, in some incomprehensible way, finally at peace. After the collapse in Turin, Friedrich Nietzsche exists for another 11 years, but it would be misleading to say he lives them. What remains is a shell, a body that continues its biological functions, while the mind that once blazed with insight has been extinguished or transformed into something unrecognizable. From the clinic in Basel, he is transferred to another psychiatric facility in Jena, closer to where his mother lives. The physicians there observe him with clinical detachment, recording symptoms, noting behaviors, attempting diagnoses. What they see is disturbing: a man who alternates between periods of apparent normality and complete confusion. Someone who sometimes seems to recognize visitors but more often stares at them without comprehension. There are moments when Nietzsche appears almost himself. He can hold brief conversations. He responds appropriately to simple questions, but then, without warning, he descends into incomprehensibility. He makes grandiose claims that he is Napoleon, that he created the world, that he possesses vast wealth and power. He performs strange actions, dancing crudely, banging on pianos, refusing to wear clothes. In March of 1890, his mother Franziska arranges for him to be released into her care. She takes him to Naumburg, to the household where he grew up, and there he will remain for the next 7 years. Franziska is elderly now, in her 60s, but she devotes herself to caring for her broken son with tireless dedication. She feeds him, dresses him, walks with him, protects him from his own increasingly childlike impulses. Nietzsche's condition during these years is heartbreaking. He recognizes his mother most of the time, though he sometimes seems confused about whether she is his mother or his wife. He can feed himself, though he eats messily, without the refinement he once possessed. He can walk, though he must be guided and supervised. He occasionally plays the piano, producing simple melodies or chaotic noise depending on his state of mind. Friends who visit are shocked by the transformation. Peter Gast comes to see him and later writes that Nietzsche appeared content in a strange way, like an infant who has been fed and is comfortable but has no awareness of anything beyond immediate sensations. Another visitor reports that Nietzsche seemed to recognize him briefly, asked a coherent question about whether he had written good books, and then immediately lapsed back into confusion. The most disturbing aspect is the absence. When people who knew the old Nietzsche look into his eyes, they report seeing nothing of the fierce intelligence, the penetrating gaze, the intensity that had characterized him. It is as if the person they knew has died, and what remains is some primitive core of personality operating on pure instinct and emotion, without the higher functions that make us fully human. Yet there are mysteries even in this tragic state. Occasionally, Nietzsche produces sentences that seem almost philosophical, fragments of his old concerns breaking through the fog. He speaks about fate, about necessity, about accepting what is. Are these merely echoes, habit patterns repeating themselves? Or does some part of his philosophical consciousness persist, trapped beneath the damage, capable of brief moments of surfacing? We cannot know. The physicians of the time do not have the tools to assess what remains of Nietzsche's inner life. They can only observe his behavior and make notes. He seems not to suffer. He rarely complains. When his mother asks if he is in pain, he typically says no. If there is torment in his existence, it leaves no external trace. In 1897, Franziska dies. Nietzsche's sister, Elizabeth, who has been living in Paraguay attempting to establish a racist colony, returns to Germany. She takes charge of her brother, moving him to Weimar, where she establishes what will become the Nietzsche Archive. Here, she will spend the next 35 years managing her brother's literary legacy, editing his unpublished writings, and distorting his philosophy in ways he would have despised. Elizabeth is a problematic figure. She is anti-Semitic, nationalist, and eventually an admirer of the Nazi movement. She edits Nietzsche's posthumous notes into a book called The Will to Power that presents his philosophy in ways that suit her own ideological preferences. She erases or alters passages that contradict her narrative. She cultivates the image of Nietzsche as a proto-fascist, a German nationalist, a prophet of Aryan supremacy, none of which reflects his actual views accurately. But she also cares for him physically with devotion. She keeps him clean, comfortable, protected. She brings visitors to see him, including prominent figures from German cultural life. Some come out of genuine respect for his work, others come for the spectacle, the morbid curiosity of seeing the mad philosopher, the great mind reduced to idiocy. Nietzsche himself seems unaware of any of this. He sits in his room, sometimes humming, sometimes staring into space. He no longer reads, perhaps cannot read, he no longer writes. The hands that once produced those extraordinary books in an 8-month frenzy now accomplish nothing more complex than lifting food to his mouth. In June of 1900, Nietzsche suffers a stroke. His condition, already poor, deteriorates rapidly. He can no longer walk, can barely speak. On August 25th, he develops pneumonia. His body, weakened by years of vegetative existence, cannot fight the infection. On August 25th, 1899, actually on August 25th, 1900, Friedrich Nietzsche dies just 2 months before his 56th birthday. The final years raise troubling questions. Was this a mercy or a curse? Nietzsche had written about the importance of dying at the right time, about not lingering beyond one's productive years. He had celebrated the nobility of choosing one's death rather than enduring endless decline. Yet here he was, trapped in a body that continued for more than a decade after his mind had failed. Some have suggested that perhaps in some unknowable way, the madness was a kind of release. Nietzsche had pushed himself so hard, had demanded so much of his consciousness, had lived under such tremendous psychological pressure. Perhaps the breakdown was not pure catastrophe, but also an escape, a way out of the unbearable tension between what his philosophy demanded and what his human nature could sustain. Others see it as pure tragedy. The greatest mind of the 19th century, silenced at the peak of his powers, condemned to exist as a kind of living corpse, while his sister perverted his legacy, and the world stumbled toward the catastrophes of the 20th century, world wars, totalitarianism, mechanized genocide, all the horrors that Nietzsche in some way foresaw and warned against, but could do nothing to prevent. The irony is profound and painful. The man who wrote that what does not kill you makes you stronger was destroyed by what did not kill him, forced to endure year after year in a state that was neither life nor death. The philosopher who demanded amor fati, who insisted we must affirm existence completely, spent his final years in a condition where affirmation and denial were equally impossible because consciousness itself had been extinguished. Yet perhaps there is something to be learned even from this ending. Nietzsche's life and thought insisted that we face reality without comforting illusions. His breakdown and long decline force us to face an uncomfortable truth. Consciousness is fragile, meaning is precarious. The gap between brilliance and catastrophe can be traversed in a single moment. No amount of philosophical sophistication protects us from biology. No strength of will prevents disease from destroying the very capacity for will. This does not make his philosophy worthless. If anything, it makes it more poignant. Nietzsche's insights into the human condition, into the death of God and the problem of meaning, into the psychology of resentment and the possibility of life affirmation, all of these remain valid regardless of what happened to him personally. Ideas transcend the individuals who think them. Philosophy endures even when philosophers perish. But his ending does raise the question, can human beings actually live according to the philosophy Nietzsche proposed? Can we maintain amor fati in the face of terrible suffering? Can we affirm eternal recurrence without the comfort of illusions? Or are these ideals beyond human capacity, beautiful in conception but impossible in practice? As you rest tonight, consider that Nietzsche himself may not have succeeded. Despite all his brilliance, all his courage, all his relentless honesty, he may have been broken by what he saw, by what he demanded of himself, by the weight of existence without consolation. This does not diminish his achievement. If anything, it makes him more human, more sympathetic, more tragic. The questions he raised remain with us. The problems he identified persist. And perhaps that is his true legacy, not a set of answers, but a way of questioning, not a philosophy to adopt, but a challenge to face existence with all the courage and honesty we can muster, knowing that it may cost us everything and still be worth the attempt. The question haunts anyone who studies Nietzsche seriously. There is a causal chain that seems almost too obvious to miss. He develops the concept of eternal recurrence. He attempts to live according to it, to embody complete life affirmation. He pushes himself to extraordinary productivity while maintaining this intense philosophical stance. And then he breaks, collapsing into permanent madness. Can we really separate these facts? Is the connection merely coincidental? Medical science would say yes, it is coincidental. The likely cause of Nietzsche's breakdown was biological: syphilis, brain tumor, frontotemporal dementia, vascular disease, some physical process destroying his brain tissue. The timing is unfortunate, but not causally significant. Nietzsche would have collapsed whenever the disease reached a critical point, regardless of what philosophy he was pursuing. This explanation is probably correct at the immediate level. Something was happening in Nietzsche's brain that would have destroyed his cognitive functions regardless of his thoughts. You cannot think yourself into or out of syphilitic paresis or a brain tumor. Biology determines outcomes at this level. But there is another question beneath the medical one. Did Nietzsche's philosophical project contribute to the psychological vulnerability that made the breakdown so catastrophic when it came? Did his attempt to live without illusions, to maintain complete affirmation in the face of suffering, leave him without the psychological defenses most people employ to cope with difficulty? Consider what Nietzsche had done to himself philosophically. He had removed every source of consolation. God is dead. No divine justice, no afterlife, no cosmic purpose. Morality is constructed, not discovered, no absolute values, no objective meaning. eternal recurrence. Everything repeats, including all suffering and failure. The only response is amor fati, to love it all anyway. This is an extraordinarily demanding psychological stance. Most people maintain their mental equilibrium through various forms of denial, distraction, hope for the future, belief that things could be different. Nietzsche systematically eliminated all of these supports. He forced himself to look at existence clearly, to accept it as it is, to affirm it completely. Can a human mind actually do this? Can consciousness sustain itself without some element of illusion, some protective narrative that makes suffering bearable? Or does the attempt to live in pure reality, without any softening or interpretation, eventually exceed what human psychology can handle? Nietzsche himself seemed aware of this danger. In his writings before the breakdown, he speaks repeatedly of descending into the depths, of being like a machine that might explode, of searching for an alchemist's trick to transmute suffering into something bearable. These metaphors suggest he knew he was pushing himself to dangerous extremes. In one letter from 1882, he writes to Franz Overbeck, "Unless I discover the alchemist's trick of turning this filth into gold, I am lost." The desperation in this line is palpable. He cannot simply accept his suffering passively. He cannot deny it or distract himself from it. He must find some way to transform it, to make it meaningful, to incorporate it into an affirmative stance toward existence. But what if this transformation is impossible? What if some suffering is simply too great, too meaningless, too crushing to be affirmed? The eternal recurrence, in particular, seems psychologically dangerous. Imagine truly internalizing the idea that your worst moments will repeat infinitely. Every humiliation, every failure, every pain you have endured, it will all happen again exactly as it happened, eternally. For someone who has suffered as much as Nietzsche suffered, this thought is not liberating, it is crushing. Yes, theoretically, the eternal recurrence should inspire you to live better, to make choices you can affirm eternally. But Nietzsche could not change his chronic headaches, his poverty, his isolation. These were facts of his existence, and they would repeat forever in the eternal recurrence. How do you affirm that? How do you maintain psychological stability while carrying the weight of infinite repetition of suffering? Perhaps this is why Zarathustra, in Nietzsche's book, struggles so desperately with the abysmal thought. The eternal recurrence threatens to destroy him. He must wrestle with it, overcome it, learn to love it. But what if Nietzsche, the man, as opposed to Zarathustra, the character, could not complete this victory? What if he remained perpetually in that state of wrestling, never achieving the final affirmation? Living with unresolved philosophical tension at this intensity might be like living with a constant low-grade psychological crisis. You cannot resolve it, cannot escape it, cannot stop thinking about it. And if you are already suffering, physically, already isolated, already pushing yourself to extraordinary creative output, this additional weight might be the factor that eventually breaks you. There is also the phenomenon of creative mania to consider. Many artists and thinkers have experienced periods of elevated mood, racing thoughts, decreased need for sleep, and intense productivity followed by crashes into depression or exhaustion. Nietzsche's final year matches this pattern remarkably well. The euphoria, the grandiosity, the torrential productivity, these look like hypermania. Could the philosophical intensity have triggered or exacerbated a manic episode? Could the excitement of finally feeling that he had achieved life affirmation, that he had become the Übermensch he described, have pushed him into a psychological state that was inherently unsustainable? When you convince yourself that you have transcended normal human limitations, that you have achieved something unprecedented in human history, you are in dangerous territory regardless of whether there is any biological basis for mood disorder. The grandiosity in Ecce Homo could be read as philosophical confidence pushed to the point of mania. When Nietzsche writes, "I am not a man, I am dynamite," is this justified self-assessment or delusional thinking? The line between extreme confidence and delusion is not always clear, especially for someone who genuinely has done something extraordinary. What makes Nietzsche's case particularly complex is that he was, in fact, a genius whose ideas would reshape Western thought. His claims to importance were not objectively wrong, just premature. He could not have known in 1888 that he would become one of the most influential philosophers in history. From his perspective, he was an unknown professor whose books sold poorly and whom most academics ignored. Yet he wrote as if he were already a world historical figure. This seems delusional, but it turned out to be prophetic. So we face an irreducible ambiguity. The eternal recurrence may have contributed to Nietzsche's breakdown by placing unbearable psychological weight on an already stressed consciousness. Or it may have had nothing to do with it, and the breakdown would have happened regardless. His final year of productivity may have been the manic phase of a mood disorder, or it may have been authentic philosophical breakthrough terminated by purely biological catastrophe. We want clear answers, but Nietzsche's life does not provide them. What we can say is that he attempted something extremely difficult: to live without illusions, to face existence without comfort, to affirm everything, including the worst. Whether this attempt contributed to his destruction or whether it was simply the background against which biological catastrophe occurred, his effort remains one of the most remarkable and troubling in the history of philosophy. And perhaps this very ambiguity is instructive. It reminds us that consciousness is fragile, that the line between brilliant insight and catastrophic breakdown is not always clear, that the attempt to live at maximum intensity carries real risks. Nietzsche did not offer us a safe philosophy. He offered us a dangerous one, a philosophy that demands everything and promises nothing except the possibility of genuine life affirmation. Whether we accept that offer, whether we dare to think without consolation and love fate without illusion, each of us must decide for ourselves. Nietzsche showed us one possible outcome. It is both inspiring and terrifying, and that perhaps is exactly as he would have wanted it. Despite the tragic end of Nietzsche's life, his ideas did not die with his sanity. In fact, the 20th century became in many ways Nietzsche's century. His diagnosis of nihilism, his proclamation of the death of God, his exploration of will to power, and yes, his concept of eternal recurrence would shape art, literature, philosophy, and cultural consciousness in profound ways. The eternal recurrence proved to be one of his most durable and influential ideas, precisely because it works at multiple levels. As a cosmological theory, it remains speculative. As a psychological tool, it continues to provoke thought. As a literary device, it has inspired countless works. As an existential challenge, it still confronts anyone who encounters it seriously. In philosophy, the eternal recurrence became central to existentialist thought. Martin Heidegger, the German philosopher who did more than anyone to revive serious interest in Nietzsche after decades of neglect, interpreted eternal recurrence as a metaphysical principle, the fundamental thought of Nietzsche's philosophy. For Heidegger, it represented a way of understanding being itself, the eternal return of the same that structures existence. But other existentialists read it differently. Albert Camus, in The Myth of Sisyphus, uses the eternal recurrence as the ultimate expression of the absurd. Sisyphus, condemned to roll a boulder up a mountain eternally, only to have it roll back down, embodies the human condition in a universe without ultimate meaning. Yet Camus concludes with the striking claim, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy." Like Nietzsche's amor fati, this represents the triumph of affirmation over meaninglessness. Jean-Paul Sartre, though critical of many aspects of Nietzsche's philosophy, engaged seriously with the eternal recurrence as a way of understanding authenticity. To live as if your choices echo eternally, to take full responsibility for who you are without blaming circumstances or appealing to excuses, this resonates with Sartre's own emphasis on radical freedom and responsibility. In literature, the eternal recurrence became a powerful metaphor. Milan Kundera's novel The Unbearable Lightness of Being takes the concept as its organizing principle. Kundera contrasts the weight of Nietzsche's eternal recurrence with the lightness of a world where each moment occurs only once and is therefore ultimately meaningless. His characters struggle with the question, which is more bearable, the crushing weight of infinite significance or the unbearable lightness of ultimate insignificance. Thomas Mann's Dr. Faustus features a protagonist clearly modelled on Nietzsche, a brilliant composer who makes a pact with the devil for creative genius and pays for it with syphilis and madness. The novel explores the relationship between genius and disease, between breakthrough and breakdown, in ways that draw explicitly on Nietzsche's life and work. James Joyce, Jorge Luis Borges, Samuel Beckett, major literary figures of the 20th century, all engage with Nietzschean themes, including eternal recurrence, the idea that time might circle back on itself, that history might repeat without progress, that consciousness might be trapped in endless cycles, becomes a recurring motif in modernist and postmodernist literature. In psychology, Nietzsche's ideas proved remarkably prescient. Carl Jung, who knew of Nietzsche's work, developed theories about the unconscious, about archetypes, about the integration of shadow elements of personality that parallel Nietzsche's psychological insights. Viktor Frankl, the psychologist who survived Nazi concentration camps and founded logotherapy, developed therapeutic techniques that resemble Nietzsche's amor fati, finding meaning through acceptance and affirmation rather than through changing external circumstances. Contemporary psychology has even begun to use the eternal recurrence explicitly as a therapeutic tool. Some therapists ask clients to imagine living their lives repeatedly, exactly as they are. This thought experiment can clarify values, reveal unconscious regrets, and motivate behavioral change. Would you want this life back infinitely? If not, what needs to change? It is Nietzsche's question, now employed in clinical practice. In popular culture, the eternal recurrence appears in countless forms. Films like Groundhog Day explore what happens when someone must live the same day repeatedly until they learn to live it well. Science fiction stories use time loops and eternal return as plot devices that raise philosophical questions. Video games employ eternal recurrence mechanics, where players must repeat scenarios until they master them. But the legacy of eternal recurrence is not purely intellectual or cultural. It enters into how many people actually think about their lives. The question, would I want to live this day, year, life again, has become a commonplace way of assessing whether one is living authentically. Self-help books ask readers to imagine being on their deathbed looking back. Would they have regrets? Or would they affirm everything they did? This democratization of Nietzsche's idea strips away some of its philosophical depth, but also demonstrates its practical power. The eternal recurrence does not require belief in any cosmological theory. It works as a tool for self-examination, for clarifying values, for motivating change. It forces honest confrontation with the question, am I living the life I actually want? The concept has also been distorted and misappropriated. New Age spirituality sometimes treats eternal recurrence as identical to reincarnation, missing Nietzsche's emphasis that it is the same life, not different lives. Self-help gurus sometimes present it as a technique for manifesting desires or achieving success, completely missing its radical demand for accepting everything, including failure and suffering. Most tragically, the Nazis attempted to appropriate Nietzsche's philosophy, including the eternal recurrence, for their ideology. With Elizabeth Nietzsche's assistance, they presented her brother as a proto-fascist prophet of German racial supremacy. The will to power became will to dominate. The Übermensch became the Aryan Superman. The eternal recurrence became the eternal return of the Nordic race. This appropriation required systematically distorting and misreading Nietzsche's actual views. He was not a German nationalist. He called himself a good European and criticized German culture relentlessly. He was not anti-Semitic. He explicitly condemned anti-Semitism and broke with Wagner partly over Wagner's racism. He was not a militarist. He despised militarism and Prussian military culture. But the Nazis did not care about accurate interpretation. They needed a philosophical veneer for their ideology, and they used Nietzsche's name, Nietzsche's dramatic language, and carefully selected and edited fragments of Nietzsche's work to provide it. This association damaged Nietzsche's reputation for generations, making him seem dangerous or proto-fascist to many who encountered only the distorted version. Scholarly rehabilitation came slowly. It required meticulous work by philosophers who read the actual texts, who understood the historical context, who could distinguish Nietzsche's genuine views from Nazi propaganda. By the late 20th century, this work had largely succeeded. Nietzsche is now recognized as a complex, brilliant, often difficult thinker whose actual philosophy bears little resemblance to how it was appropriated by totalitarian ideology. The eternal recurrence in particular has been rescued from distortion. Scholars now recognize it not as a cosmological fact, but as a thought experiment, a psychological test, an existential challenge. It does not promise anything. It does not justify anything. It simply asks, can you affirm existence completely, without reservation, without appeal, to some better future or higher purpose? This question remains as relevant today as when Nietzsche first posed it. We live in a culture characterized by what Nietzsche would have recognized immediately as nihilism. Traditional sources of meaning, religious faith, political ideologies, belief in progress, have lost their authority for many people. We face the same question Nietzsche faced. How do we create meaning and value in a universe that does not provide them? The eternal recurrence offers one answer, or at least one approach. Instead of seeking meaning in some goal or purpose outside of life, find it within life itself. Instead of judging existence by whether it leads somewhere better, learn to love it for what it is. Instead of waiting for conditions to improve before you can say yes to life, say yes now to this life, exactly as it is. This is not easy. It may not be possible for everyone. But Nietzsche's great gift to us is showing that it is at least conceivable that human consciousness might achieve this kind of total affirmation. His failure to sustain it does not invalidate the attempt. If anything, his breakdown makes the achievement seem more valuable because we see how much it costs, how difficult it is, how close to the edge of catastrophe anyone who attempts it must live. The eternal recurrence echoes forward through time not as a proven theory, but as a permanent challenge to anyone who thinks seriously about existence. It strips away comfortable evasions. It demands honesty about whether we are actually living or merely enduring. It offers no consolation but makes possible a strange kind of joy, the joy of complete affirmation, of loving fate absolutely. Whether we accept this challenge, whether we dare to ask ourselves Nietzsche's question and face honestly what the answer reveals, that remains for each of us to decide. But the question itself will not go away. It has entered into our cultural consciousness, become part of how thoughtful people examine their lives. And that is Nietzsche's legacy, not a set of answers, but a way of questioning that changes anyone who engages with it seriously. Now, as the night deepens and you prepare for rest, let us turn the eternal recurrence toward you. Not as abstract philosophy or historical curiosity, but as an actual question about your actual life. Because Nietzsche did not intend this as theory. He intended it as transformation. Imagine it clearly, not vaguely, not as pleasant philosophical speculation, but as real as you can make it. Tonight, in what Nietzsche called your loneliest loneliness, the demon appears. Not literally, perhaps, but as a thought that will not let you go, a question you cannot evade. This life you are living right now. These relationships, this work, these choices, these habits, these dreams deferred and pursued, these moments of joy and stretches of boredom, these triumphs, however small, and failures, however large, all of it will repeat, not just once more, infinitely, eternally. The exact same sequence of events, the exact same outcomes, forever. How does your body respond? Notice what happens in your chest, your stomach, your throat. The physical reaction is data. It reveals truth that thinking alone might obscure. If you feel immediate resistance, a clenching, a desire to escape the thought, this tells you something important. There are aspects of your life you are enduring rather than embracing. Parts of yourself you have not fully accepted. Choices you made that you have not forgiven yourself for making. The eternally. Recurrence is merciless in revealing this. It will not let you comfort yourself with thoughts of future improvement. It will not let you excuse your current dissatisfaction by imagining that circumstances will change. In eternal recurrence, circumstances repeat exactly. Either you affirm them or you do not. Either you can say yes to this life right now, or you cannot. But the question is not meant to torment you. It is meant to clarify. It shows you where you need to make changes, not in the past, which is fixed, but in your relationship to the past and in your choices going forward. Consider the regrets you carry, mistakes made, opportunities missed, words spoken or unspoken. In linear time, we tell ourselves we will move beyond these regrets, that eventually they will fade or be redeemed. But eternal recurrence says these moments will return forever. How do you make peace with that? Amor Fati provides the answer, or at least the direction. You must learn to love these moments, not despite their difficulty, but because they are part of your story, part of what made you who you are. The mistakes taught you, the losses deepened you, the failures redirected you toward something better, or at least toward greater self-knowledge. This is not self-deception. It is not pretending that bad things were actually good. It is recognizing that your life is a whole, a complete story, and every part contributes to that whole. To reject any part is to reject the whole, to reject yourself. Think about the relationships in your life, the people you love, the people you have lost, the people with whom your connection remains unresolved. If all of this will repeat eternally, what does that change about how you engage with these relationships now? Perhaps it makes you more present, less willing to postpone difficult conversations or assume there will always be more time. Perhaps it makes you more forgiving, recognizing that eternal recurrence means eternal coexistence with these people and their flaws and your conflicts. Perhaps it makes you more grateful, seeing the preciousness of connection that will echo through eternity. Consider your work, however you spend your days. If you must do this again infinitely, does it feel meaningful? Or does it feel like time being killed, life being endured? This is not to say you must immediately quit your job or make dramatic changes, but the question reveals something about whether you have found or created meaning in what you do. Even work that is objectively difficult or unglamorous can be affirmed if you approach it with the right consciousness. The meaning is not always in the work itself, but in how you bring yourself to the work, what you make of it, how you allow it to shape you. Think about the daily routines, the habits that structure your life. Morning coffee, evening walks, the way you spend weekends, the small rituals that might seem insignificant. In eternal recurrence, these become infinitely significant because they repeat forever. The question forces you to ask, are these habits enriching your life, or are they just filling time? The demon's question also illuminates what truly matters to you. When you imagine everything repeating, what are you most grateful will repeat? What moments do you want back infinitely? These are your genuine values, the things that actually make your life meaningful, regardless of what you tell yourself or others about what should matter. For some, it might be moments of creative work, the flow state when time dissolves and you are completely absorbed in making something. For others, it might be moments of connection, of being fully present with people you love. For others still, it might be moments in nature or moments of learning or moments of service to others. Whatever emerges as the answer, this reveals your authentic values. Not the values you think you should have, not the values you were taught, but the values that actually structure your lived experience. The eternal recurrence cuts through self-deception and shows you what you actually love. But notice also what you fear will repeat. What do you dread about eternal recurrence? The pain, the loss, the boredom, the awareness of your own limitations. These fears are also data. They show you where you have not yet achieved amor fati, where you still resist existence rather than embracing it. The work, if you choose to do it, is learning to transform your relationship to these feared repetitions, not to deny them or minimize them, but to incorporate them into your affirmation, to see how even the worst moments connect to the best moments, how suffering and joy interweave into a single fabric. This is extraordinarily difficult. Perhaps it is impossible to achieve completely. Nietzsche himself may have failed, but the attempt, the practice of moving toward total affirmation, toward amor fati, toward the ability to say yes to eternal recurrence, this practice itself changes you. It makes you more honest about what matters. It makes you less willing to waste time on what does not matter. It makes you more present because this moment, which will repeat eternally, demands your full attention. It makes you braver because if you must live this life infinitely, you might as well live it with courage rather than fear. As sleep approaches, as your thinking becomes less linear and more dreamlike, let the eternal recurrence dissolve from a philosophical concept into something felt rather than thought. Your life in all its particularity and imperfection, eternally recurring. Can you rest in that thought? Can you let it be peaceful rather than disturbing? If you can, even for a moment, you have touched what Nietzsche was reaching toward, that strange synthesis of ultimate weightlessness and ultimate significance. The moment that does not matter at all in the cosmic scheme becomes infinitely precious because it repeats forever. The life that has no meaning given from outside becomes infinitely meaningful because it is yours, eternally yours forever, returning. This is not the only way to think about existence. There are other philosophies, other approaches, other ways of finding meaning and purpose, but it is one way, Nietzsche's way, and it has a stark beauty. It demands everything. It promises nothing except the possibility of genuine affirmation, and for those who can bear its weight, it offers a kind of freedom, the freedom that comes from wanting exactly what is. The night has grown deep around you, the questions have been asked, the story has been told. Now it is time to release the thinking mind and allow the older rhythms to take over, the rhythms that carry you towards sleep, toward that small daily death and rebirth. Consider how sleep itself enacts a kind of eternal recurrence. Each night you surrender consciousness. Each morning you return to yourself. The cycle repeats throughout your life as it has repeated throughout all of human existence, as it will repeat for as long as humans endure. There is something deeply reassuring in this rhythm. You do not have to maintain conscious control every moment. You can let go, trust the process, allow your body to do what it knows how to do. Sleep comes whether you will it or resist it. The letting go is all. Nietzsche, in his final years after the collapse, existed in a state we might imagine as a perpetual dream. The boundaries between waking and sleeping dissolved. The fierce intellectual activity that had characterized his life ceased. What remained was something more primitive, more fundamental. Simple existence without the burden of self-consciousness, without the demand for meaning. Perhaps there was a kind of peace in this. The man who had tried so hard to affirm everything, to say yes to all of existence, finally released from that impossible effort. No longer needing to love fate because he no longer had the consciousness that could hate it. No longer wrestling with eternal recurrence because time itself had lost meaning. We do not know what Nietzsche experienced in those final years. Consciousness might have flickered occasionally like distant lightning, illuminating nothing clearly. Or it might have been absent entirely, the lights turned off, the mechanism running on pure biological automation. But in either case, the struggle was over. This is not to celebrate his breakdown. The loss of one of history's greatest minds was a tragedy, a waste of potential. But there is something to learn even from this ending. That consciousness, for all its glory, is also a burden, that the examined life, lived intensely and honestly, extracts a price, that sometimes the circle completes itself, not with triumph, but with silence. As you prepare for your own small surrender into sleep, you participate in something ancient and universal. All of your ancestors experienced this transition between waking and sleeping. All of your descendants will experience it. The pattern repeats generation after generation, like waves on a shore. In this sense, eternal recurrence is not a philosophical speculation, but a lived reality. The sun sets and rises, the seasons cycle. Life emerges, grows, reproduces, dies, and new life emerges from the old. The patterns repeat with variations, but they repeat. Nothing is completely new, nothing is completely gone, everything returns in different forms. Your own life participates in these larger cycles. The cells in your body die and are replaced. The thoughts you think now are not entirely your own, they are inherited, modified, passed forward. The love you feel connects you to every human who has ever felt love. The fear, the joy, the longing, the peace, all of this is both uniquely yours and timelessly universal. Let yourself sink into this awareness. You are not separate from existence. You are a temporary manifestation of its eternal patterns. Your individual consciousness, precious as it is, emerges from something larger and will return to something larger. This is not loss. This is participation in the fundamental rhythm of reality. Nietzsche sought to love this rhythm completely, to affirm it without reservation. Whether he succeeded or failed, whether his attempt strengthened or broke him, the question itself enriches anyone who encounters it. To ask whether you can love existence in its totality, to measure your life against the standard of eternal recurrence, to practice amor fati even imperfectly, these efforts transform consciousness even when they do not achieve perfect realization. Tonight, you can rest from these efforts. The questions will still be there tomorrow. The challenges of existence will return with morning. But for now, in the deep darkness of night, you can simply be. No affirmation required, no judgment necessary, just breathing, just existing, just allowing sleep to come. The eternal recurrence of this moment, you, here, now, preparing for rest, is not burdensome. It is gentle. If this moment must return infinitely, let it return exactly as it is, peaceful, quiet. The day's demands released, the body slowly relaxing, the mind's activity gradually subsiding like waves, settling into stillness. Nietzsche ended in silence, but his ideas did not end. They continue transforming through new minds, offering their challenge to each generation. The eternal recurrence of thought, of questioning, of attempting to live honestly and fully, this pattern will repeat as long as consciousness exists to engage with it. You are part of that repetition. Your encounter with these ideas, your wrestling with these questions, adds something to the ongoing conversation about what it means to be human, to be conscious, to face existence without easy answers. Your struggle, however private and personal, connects you to everyone who has struggled with similar questions. Let this connection be comforting as sleep approaches. You are not alone in your questioning, in your seeking, in your occasional failures and small victories. Nietzsche is with you in his thoughts, if not his presence. All the other questioners across time are with you. The conversation continues even as individual voices fade. The breath that rises and falls in your chest right now is the same breath, in essence, that sustained Nietzsche through his suffering and his insights. The same breath that sustained Buddha and Jesus and all the countless unknown human beings who faced the mystery of existence and did their best to live well. You breathe together across time, part of the eternal recurrence of embodied consciousness. Let each exhale release a little more of the day's tension. Let each inhale be simple acceptance of what is. No philosophy needed now, no eternal recurrence to affirm or deny, just breathing, just being, just allowing the transition from waking to sleep to happen naturally, as it has happened billions of times before and will happen billions of times again. Deep, deep eternity, Nietzsche wrote. Not as burden, but as comfort. Everything returns, nothing is lost. The moment passes, but will come again. The love you felt will be felt again. The beauty you glimpsed will be glimpsed again. And this peace you are finding now, this gentle settling into rest, will also return infinitely, eternally, whenever consciousness releases its grip and allows being to simply be. Good night, rest well. The circle continues. Tomorrow, in your own way, you will begin again. But for now, for this night, let there be only rest, only peace, only the eternal return to the simplest truth. Existence itself before all questioning, beneath all philosophy, just here, just now, just breathing, just being. Sleep well, fellow traveler, in the mystery. The questions will keep, the answers will keep. For now, there is only rest, only the deep night, only the eternal return to peace. Thank you for joining this journey through Nietzsche's thought and life. If this brought you peace or insight, please like and subscribe to support the channel. Share with others seeking philosophical comfort in the night. More philosophers await in future episodes. Rest well, and may you find your own way to say yes to life, however you understand it, wherever it leads you. Good night.